Eric Fleming wasn't just another cowboy on your TV screen. He was the face of Rawhide, the gritty leader audiences loved in the golden era of Westerns. But then, one day, he vanished. Not from television, not from the public eye, but from life itself. And the truth behind his disappearance? It's more disturbing than anyone expected. In today's video, we will explore each truth behind his tragic death. But do you remember watching Rawhide? Type 1 if you do, or 0 if you're just hearing about it now. His death is more mysterious than you think. Eric Fleming's death, an unsettling truth. For decades, the tragic and mysterious death of actor Eric Fleming has haunted classic television fans and entertainment historians alike. Best known for his iconic portrayal of trail boss Gil Favre on the hit Western series Rawhide, Fleming was at the height of his fame in the early 1960s. But in 1966, during the filming of a television movie in a remote area of Peru, his life was cut short in a horrifying and baffling way. Now, after years of speculation, conflicting reports, and a veil of silence surrounding the circumstances, the full truth behind his death has finally come to light. And it's far more unsettling than most fans ever imagined. Eric Fleming had ventured to the Huallaga River in Peru to film Hide Jungle, a two-part television movie pilot for ABC that was intended to expand his career into more adventurous and exotic roles. On September 28, 1966, while shooting a scene in a canoe with his co-star, Nico Minardos, tragedy struck. Reports at the time were vague and confusing. Fleming had supposedly fallen into the river during a rehearsal or a take, and was swept away by the fast-moving current. Despite an intense search effort, his body was not recovered for several days, and when it was, the condition of his remains raised troubling questions. For years, the accepted story was that he drowned, a simple, if heartbreaking, accident in a treacherous location. But behind the scenes, many involved with the production suspected there was more to the story. Whispers circulated about inadequate safety precautions, poor planning, and even conflicts among the crew. These suspicions were compounded by the Peruvian authorities' lack of detailed investigation, the minimal press coverage, and the seeming desire to put the matter to rest quickly. Now, thanks to recently unearthed production memos, interviews with surviving crew members, and access to declassified diplomatic communications between the U.S. Embassy and officials, a more complete and disturbing picture of Fleming's final hours has emerged. First, it's now confirmed that the filmmakers had not secured adequate safety equipment for the canoe scenes, despite being warned about the dangers of the river by locals. Fleming and Minardos were filming without life vests, and the canoe used was deemed unstable and inappropriate for the strength of the current. Furthermore, Fleming had reportedly expressed concerns about the scene just days before his death. He told a fellow cast member he didn't feel safe and was unsure about the river's unpredictability. Yet, due to budget constraints and the pressure to stay on schedule, the production pressed forward recklessly. Worse still, a set of photographs taken just before the accident reveals that the scene was not being properly supervised by the stunt coordinator, and the director insisted on doing multiple takes to get a perfect angle of the canoe passing through the rapids. Fleming was exhausted, dehydrated, and reportedly ill from the jungle conditions, a dangerous state for anyone to be in under such physically demanding circumstances. When the canoe capsized, Minardos was able to swim to shore. Fleming, on the other hand, was pulled beneath the rapids. According to confidential cables sent by the U.S. consulate in Lima, Fleming's body, when discovered days later, showed signs of severe trauma, including head injuries inconsistent with drowning alone. It is now believed that he was struck by underwater rocks with tremendous force, leading to a brutal death that was both immediate and avoidable had precautions been taken. Perhaps the most shocking revelation is how quickly efforts were made to obscure the more disturbing elements of the tragedy. ABC and the producers of Hide Jungle pushed a narrative of accidental drowning, downplaying any suggestion of liability or negligence. They worked closely with local officials to keep details out of the press and rushed to conclude the incident as a natural disaster. Internally, ABC canceled the project, quietly shelved the footage, and avoided any public retrospection on what went wrong. Crew members were discouraged from speaking to the media. Minardos, deeply traumatized, gave only vague statements in the years that followed, further adding to the mystique and confusion around Fleming's death. On October 1st, 3 days after the accident, his body was finally found downstream. The news sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and devastated his loved ones. Fleming was only 41 years old at the time of his death. If you think stars like Fleming deserve to be remembered, click subscribe and join us for more true Hollywood stories. Menardos recalled years later, with a haunted look and a quiet voice, how he had tried to talk Eric out of it. The water was too fast. You could see it, smell it. It wasn't just dangerous, it was wrong. I told him we should wait, use dummies or shoot somewhere else. But the schedule said otherwise. The director urged them forward. Fleming, perhaps not wanting to look weak, or maybe trying to lead by example, nodded and stepped into the canoe. The first few seconds were calm. Then the rapids hit. The boat twisted violently, pitching forward as it hit a submerged boulder. Fleming was flung out into the rushing water, his broad frame vanishing beneath the waves. Menardos managed to scramble out of the canoe and cling to the rocks, screaming his friend's name. There was no answer, just the sound of whitewater and chaos. The crew panicked. Locals launched a search, but the current had already taken Fleming far downstream. For 3 days, the jungle held him. Then, they found him, battered and broken. Miles away, his body tangled in roots and debris. The autopsy was grim, blunt trauma from the rocks, signs of injury from the river's detritus, and even evidence consistent with piranha activity. It wasn't just drowning. It was a death shaped by neglect and pressure. It came out later that warnings had been ignored. The river's dangers were well known among locals. Boatmen had begged the producers not to film in that section. Crew members spoke of tension on set, of an unrelenting push to get the shot at all costs. Even Fleming, usually confident, had expressed unease. But the cameras rolled anyway. And when the Hualaga took him, it wasn't just an actor who was lost, it was a man who had fought for every inch of success. Finally, silenced not by failure, but by a gamble he should never have been asked to make. In the end, Eric Fleming's last performance was unscripted, tragic, and far too real. What he left. At the time, he was engaged to Lynn Garber, a woman he had planned to marry. His sudden passing left her and many others in deep mourning, and the loss was felt profoundly by his fans and colleagues alike. Following Fleming's death, the production of High Jungle was abruptly terminated. Without its leading man and out of respect for the tragedy, MGM decided not to complete or release the episode. It remains a lost project, known mostly for its association with Fleming's untimely death rather than for its creative ambitions. The incident marked a sorrowful and abrupt end to the career of an actor who had overcome great adversity in his early life, including a difficult childhood and severe physical injuries, to achieve success in Hollywood. Eric Fleming's death was not only a loss to the entertainment world, but also a painful reminder of the risks actors often take in the name of storytelling, especially in an era when on-location filming lacked today's safety standards. The newly uncovered details reveal not just a tragic accident, but a grim tale of professional oversight, corporate indifference, and a systemic failure to protect a beloved actor from an obviously preventable fate. Though fans still remember him fondly as the stoic, noble Gil Favre, this deeper look into his final moments casts a somber shadow over his legacy. The mystery, long buried under half-truths and silence, is now solved, but its resolution offers little comfort. Instead, it serves as a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of fame and the real dangers that often lurk behind the camera. The final betrayal of Eric Fleming. Over the course of the years that have passed since that awful September day in 1966, Eric Fleming's untimely death has been shrouded in silence, conjecture, and studio comments that have been too protective. Nevertheless, in the year 2020, a voice rose from the past to reveal the truth. Lynn Garber, who was Fleming's personal partner and the woman who lived through his rise and fall, released a memoir titled Death on the Amazon, My Memories of Eric Fleming. She disclosed something that was not just upsetting but also extremely distressing. When Garber was in Peru, he had been there. The laughing, the long workdays, and the buzzing tension that clung to the team like the humid air were all things that she recalled remembering. In addition, she recalled the warnings, which were not subtle ones. After a certain point, the local peasants, who had been fishing the Hualaga for generations, refused to accompany the film team any further downstream. They were advised by an elder that too many people drown there. The river does not return bodies, the speaker said. Garber, however, stated in his writing that these warnings were disregarded. That particular shot was essential for the creators, who were brimming with want and conceit. They needed the climax, which required the main character to triumph against nature. What became less important was whether or not the actor survived the scene. Garber portrays a picture of a guy who has been firmly conditioned to accept risk, despite the fact that his senses told him differently. This is even more concerning. Despite the fact that she does not find Fleming's decision to proceed with the scenario to be acceptable, she does explain it. He was raised in a household where physical abuse was a common occurrence. Before the youngster aged 10 years old, his father, who was an aggressive alcoholic, had wrecked Eric, both physically and emotionally. Because of that traumatic experience, he became a guy who sought control via toughness, who understood that safety was not assured, and who learnt that to hesitate will result in punishment. The tenacity he shown had been rewarded by Hollywood. In light of this, when the producers encouraged him, "You can do it, Eric. You're a pro," he asked. And then he did what he had always done. He followed. It is written by Garber that he was terrified. However, they gave him the impression that if he said no, it would be the end of everything. Her narrative is reinforced by interviews from the archives, as well as a new documentary that features first-hand evidence from members of the crew who survived the incident, including Nico Menardos, who also appeared in the film. In a videotape of an interview that has not yet been made public, Menardos can be seen sitting obviously upset as he recalls the time shortly before Fleming entered the canoe. His eyes met mine and he spoke the words, "This is insane." At that moment, however, the cameraman yelled out, "We're rolling," and Eric flashed a grin. That grin there, it was not truthful. It was analogous to armor. After then, he entered the picture. This was the last time I ever saw him. Another member of the team, who wished to remain nameless, continued by saying, "They pushed him into the river with less concern for his safety than for the scene. No life jackets were available for use. There is no backup plan. There is no rescue team. It was nothing more than a river in the bush that had been swelled by rain and choked with debris, and a leading man who did not want to lose his performance or his dignity." The events that followed were described as a catastrophe that unfolded in slow motion. It was a lurching boat. While Fleming was submerged in the rapids, he vanished. There was an outbreak of panic. Garber and the others waited for a considerable amount of time. The sun went down. After that, there was still another. After that, there was still another. After a period of 3 days, his body was discovered downstream, entangled in driftwood, with his gorgeous face nearly completely unrecognizable. The official narrative placed the blame on the current. Garber, however, was an expert. This was not a casual occurrence. Negligence was the cause. In the world of show business, it was irresponsibility disguised as bravery. She states in her writing, "He was not a daredevil. He was a man who had already endured far too much already to pass away in such a manner." Although it is extremely upsetting, Garber's narrative is an essential contrast to the myths that are associated with the studio. Reruns of Rawhide and bits from Queen of Outer Space have helped to keep his image alive in the years that have passed since his passing. He was a towering, silver-haired figure with a booming voice and steel eyes. On the other hand, it is only now, via voices such as Garber's, that we are able to perceive the wounded and broken individual under the mythology. A guy who passed away not as a result of his failures, but rather as a result of Hollywood's refusal to protect him. A death that was unbecoming of a guy who had always worked hard to establish himself in the glitzy world of Hollywood. Early life. Fleming's early years were far from easy. Born into a tumultuous and abusive home, he endured harrowing experiences that would leave lasting scars, both physical and emotional. His father was reportedly violently abusive, and at just 8 years old, young Edward attempted to escape his painful home life by running away. He ended up on the streets of Los Angeles, living as a vagrant and fending for himself in the city's underbelly. He did whatever work he could find to survive, including shining shoes and working in local markets. His hardships continued into adolescence, leading him down a dark path. He became involved in gang activity and eventually found himself on the wrong side of the law. A fateful accident involving a gun resulted in a severe facial injury that required multiple reconstructive surgeries. Fleming later referred to this as a turning point in his life. After undergoing surgery to reconstruct his face, at one point suffering a failed operation that left him temporarily disfigured, he began to rethink the direction his life was taking. This painful period ignited a personal metamorphosis, ultimately giving him the drive to pursue a new, more positive path. Seeking discipline and a sense of purpose, Fleming enlisted in the U.S. Navy during World War II. He served with distinction, rising to the rank of petty officer and being deployed to the South Pacific. His time in the Navy instilled in him values of resilience, honor, and camaraderie, traits that would later shine through in his most famous acting roles. After being honorably discharged, he returned to the United States with a desire to improve himself both intellectually and artistically. Initially, working as a laborer at Paramount Studios, Fleming's rugged looks and quiet intensity caught the attention of casting agents. Career highlights. He started attending acting lessons, and eventually he studied under renowned trainers who assisted him in honing his talent throughout his training. The 1950s were the decade in which Fleming began to secure tiny roles in cinema and television. Some of the films and television shows in which he appeared were Studio One, Bonanza, and The Silent Service. Despite the fact that these roles were modest, they were the beginning of laying the groundwork for what would eventually become a breakout role. Through his performance as Gil Favre in the CBS television series Rawhide, which ran from 1959 to 1965, Eric Fleming was able to achieve the pinnacle of his distinguished career. On screen, Fleming provided gravitas, depth, and quiet leadership to the role of the trail boss who was a harsh and principled individual. As a result of his genuineness, commanding presence, and the emotional depth he gave to the part, he became a household name in a short amount of time. Rawhide became one of the most successful Western series of its time because to Fleming's steady hand in the series' development. Not only did the program successfully recreate the frontier spirit of the Old West, but it also explored moral and societal concerns that struck a chord with viewers throughout the world. Fleming's performance was essential in starting the career of a young Clint Eastwood, who played the character of Rowdy Yates, a boisterous young cowboy. Fleming's performance also set the tone for the entire series for which it was responsible. Their on-screen chemistry, which was a balance between Fleming's authority and Eastwood's impetuosity, resulted in a viewing experience that was both lively and engaging. There was a significant change that took place behind the scenes of the long-running Western series Rawhide on CBS during the summer break that happened in the year 1965. Ben Brady, who had just been hired as the show's executive producer, made a significant move that would have long-lasting repercussions. The decision was intended to reinvent the show's formula and seek to recover the show's declining popularity. The once popular show Rawhide had begun to show symptoms of tiredness in both its storyline and its ratings, and Brady, who had become the sixth producer to take over the reins of Rawhide during its existence on television, was charged with the enormous assignment of reviving the show. The dismissal of several long-standing and beloved cast members was initiated by Brady, who was of the opinion that a dramatic shakeup of the cast could infuse the series with new energy and direction. Among those who were let go was Eric Fleming, who had played the stoic and commanding trail boss Gil Favre, a central figure in the series since its inception in 1959. In addition to Fleming, a number of other regulars who had developed a strong following among the audience over the course of the years were also abruptly terminated. Sheb Wooley, who is well known for his rough charm and depiction of trail scout Pete Nolan, was one of those who were rejected, despite the fact that his role has been significant for a long time as the experienced guide and frequently provide the word of wisdom while on the drive. In addition, James Murdoch, who played the role of Mushi, a camp kitchen assistant who was well-intentioned but constantly stumbles over his words, was discharged. He had endeared himself to viewers for his devoted support of Wishbone, the crusty trail cook who was portrayed by Paul Bringar. His role was a source of comedic relief and genuine frailty. In the same fashion, Robert Cabal, who had previously portrayed the gentle-mannered but trustworthy wrangler Jesus, was removed from the cast. The introduction of Jesus, who was one of the few Latino characters to appear on a major television western at the time, brought a degree of cultural variety to the otherwise homogeneous ensemble. Jesus was one of the few Latino characters to appear on the show periodically. In the end, Rocky Shahan, who had been playing the role of Joe Scarlett, a quiet but dependable drover, was also dismissed from the cast. Despite the fact that Shahan's character was not frequently in the center of the tale, he had been a constant member of the trail crew and had contributed to the sense of continuity and camaraderie that occurred throughout the episode. It is possible that the firing of Eric Fleming himself was the most surprising aspect of all of these dismissals. Fleming's portrayal as Gil Favre, who served as the show's dramatic center and the de facto commander of the show's cattle drives, was a significant contributor to the early popularity of the series from the beginning. Rawhide was founded in a reality that viewers related to because of his stringent yet ethical leadership, which was frequently punctuated by periods of emotional contemplation and moral decision-making. When it came to the emotional weight of the performance, Fleming was not just a talented performer but also a co-architect of the production. The unexpected removal of his position came as a shock to both fans and analysts of the gaming industry. Fleming provided a sardonic and somewhat rebellious perspective on his departure in a subsequent interview with TV Guide. He stated, "CBS fired me because they were paying me $1 million a year." Fleming's opinion was somewhat belligerent over his firing. His comment brought to light the difficulties that exist between network economics and artistic direction. Despite the fact that the actual amount was closer to $220,000 yearly, which was an amazing wage for a television actor at the time. It also hinted that he felt a certain amount of resentment over the choice, which may have been made worse by the fact that he had been a visible and steady presence on the show for 7 seasons. Eric Fleming's career and changes. Following Fleming's departure, the producers made the contentious decision to promote Clint Eastwood to the post of trail boss. At the time, Eastwood was playing the role of Rowdy Yates, a younger and more impetuous drover. A significant narrative turning point for the series occurred when there was a change in the dynamics of the characters. Nevertheless, it was stated that Eastwood himself had mixed feelings regarding the modifications. In interviews that he would later give, he would reveal that he was nervous about taking on the main role, particularly under such difficult circumstances, and with the sudden departure of his friend and co-star, Fleming. Eastwood understood that the strong mentor-protege connection that existed between Favor and Yates was a significant component of Rawhide's appeal. He also understood that the absence of Fleming's consistent presence resulted in the loss of that important dramatic tension. Despite this, Eastwood took on the position with a professional demeanor and guided the trail crew through a shortened 8th season that consisted of only 13 episodes. In spite of these efforts to breathe fresh life into the performance, the modifications did not provide the outcomes that were thought to be desirable. Despite the fact that Rawhide continued to struggle in the ratings, CBS decided to discontinue the series before the end of 1965 because they were no longer confident in the show's capacity to be successful over many years. The decision to cancel the series was taken by CBS CEO William S. Paley, who made the choice to do so even before the final few episodes of the season had been shown. This was the ultimate blow. And further element that contributed to the collapse of the program, as stated by Eastwood, was a strategic error on the side of the network. He went on to explain that Rawhide had been the only program that had been consistently profitable for CBS to run on Friday evenings, which is a time period that is renowned for having poorly attended shows. Tuesday evenings were chosen as the new time slot for the show by CBS management in an effort to capitalize on the show's relative advantages. Due to this unfortunate circumstance, Rawhide found itself in direct conflict with Combat, a gritty World War II thriller that is shown on ABC and stars Rick Jason and Vic Morrow. The drama, which was based around a platoon of American troops fighting on the Western Front, drew a similar audience, primarily male viewers who were drawn to stories of leadership, action, and struggle. This choice about the scheduling of events greatly divided the fan base, which eventually accelerated Rawhide's collapse. Return to television. The Glass Bottom Boat, a romantic spy comedy released in 1966, was a film that served as a colorful showcase for America's love. Doris Day, Eric Fleming, who had previously faced a series of problems in his career, displayed his tenacity and flexibility by rebounding with a high-profile supporting part in the film. Fleming played the role of a suave and dashing spy who became embroiled in a flurry of humorous misunderstandings and espionage shenanigans during the time period of the Cold War in the movie. His refined presence and incisive performance stood out among a group of seasoned comedy performers, giving a dimension of charm and mystery that matched Day's effervescent personality and the film's screwball energy. Both of these elements contributed to the film's overall success. In spite of the fact that Fleming was not the main character, his performance provided a look into his versatility outside the Western genre, which had hitherto characterized his public image. At the same time, Fleming made a noteworthy comeback to television by appearing as a guest star in 3 episodes of NBC's Bonanza, which was the most popular and extensively viewed television series during the middle of the 1960s. Ben Cartwright, the father of the Cartwright family, and his 3 sons, including Little Joe, who was portrayed by Michael Landon, were the show's protagonists. The show was set against the backdrop of the Nevada frontier, and it followed the Cartwright family. The guest appearances that Fleming made not only allowed him to reacquaint himself with some of the Western narrative traditions that he had perfected on Rawhide, but they also demonstrated his capacity to embody characters that were not only complicated but often frequently morally ambiguous inside a framework that was suitable for children. As a result of working under the direction of William Whitney, an accomplished action director who is recognized for his fast-paced and dynamic visual style, Fleming's performances were given an additional level of intensity in the 18th episode of the 7th season of Bonanza, which was named Peace Officer. Fleming made a cameo that ranks among the most powerful of his appearances. Wes Dunn, a vicious lawman whose preoccupation with control and justice becomes a cautionary tale about the misuse of power, was portrayed by him in a manner that was both scary and nuanced in the film. As a result of Fleming's portrayal of Dunn's spiral into authoritarian brutality, which is conveyed with such subtle threat, the performance was praised by both reviewers and fans for its psychological complexity. The fact that he was able to give humanity to even the most brutal characters was evidence of his depth as an actor and his willingness to explore dark emotional ground. After recognizing Fleming's compelling screen presence and great chemistry with the regular actors, David Dortort, the creator and executive producer of Bonanza, invited him return for the next season to take on a part that was even more ambitious than the one he had previously agreed to play. When it came to this particular episode, Fleming played the role of Haber Clausen, a principled and devoted Mormon rancher, in the 2-part episode titled The Pursuit. As a result of its in-depth exploration of the delicate and seldom-spoken topic of religious persecution in the American West, this narrative was revolutionary for its historical period. Clausen and his family were on the receiving end of mistrust, discrimination, and finally, violent enmity from nearby settlers during the course of the plot, which followed their efforts to live peacefully in accordance with their religious beliefs. Fleming painted a portrayal of a man whose principles are challenged by misfortune, yet remain unshaken. He did this by imbuing the character with a calm dignity, compassion, and strength. Legacy. Years later, Fleming's death still lingers in the public consciousness, not just because it was tragic, but because it was avoidable. Questions were raised about safety measures on location, about the preparedness of the crew, about the decisions that led to that scene being shot in dangerous waters. There was no funeral fanfare. Fleming had lived privately, and he died far from the spotlight. Yet his legacy remains etched into the canon of classic television. Clint Eastwood, when asked about his former co-star years later, simply said, "Eric was a pro. He taught me a lot. I think about him now and then, especially when I think about how fragile this business and life can be." Eric Fleming survived a brutal childhood. He survived Hollywood, but he couldn't survive a river in Peru. He gave everything for a role and paid with his life. To this day, Rawhide fans remember him as a hero, but the truth behind his disappearance remains a haunting reminder of how quickly the dream can become a nightmare. Do you think Eric Fleming's death could have been prevented? Like this video to honor his memory. And subscribe so you never miss the untold truths behind Hollywood's legends.